Okay, so you just saw me using this knife. This is Extremaratio Cephalans, which in my mind is marketed towards bushcraft and survival. And I'm going to tell you why I think that's a good choice for this knife. And a while ago, actually it was yesterday, you saw me use this knife, which was Poleforce's Compact 1, to basically do a similar thing. And I'm going to tell you, this is the wrong knife for the job. All right, this is the wrong knife for the job. Let me explain why. So I want to talk something about survival here, and that is today and the other day we decided we would be out and there were thunderstorms predicted. So, you know, we got on our pants. The other day we didn't have them on, but some really serious thunderstorms, lots of lightning, and we had some reasonably good shelter, and you'll look at that a bit later on. It was just like a summer hut kind of thing. From the rain, no shelter from the wind. But it's possible, if you don't go out prepared, that you can actually become a liability. So to test that theory out, I know that's what happens anyway. Just imagine you went out with one of these neck knives. These, not neck knives, sorry, this is a finger knife. These things are really popular. And they're okay for certain things, but they're really limited, and they're not really a bushcraft knife. If you went out with this, what could you do? Well, if we had to cut birch bark in a hurry, it's a bit of a problem, because you will see from these following images here, this video here now, that because the blade is so thick, it was difficult for me to, no matter how sharp this is, and it's pretty damn sharp, to go through this birch bark, because it's pretty thick stuff, right? And it's slow to cut, and plus the fact the handle's really small, so it gives you no advantages to leverage. Knowing that I would have to, so how could that mistake happen? And you might say, well, I'm just going to go on a day hike, and suddenly you've got to light a fire, it's blown up really cold and wet, and a fire is a great thing for morale, and you pull this knife out. No one else has got a knife, but you've been smart enough to carry a knife, but you carried the wrong knife for the job, because when you go to cut the birch bark in a hurry to start a fire, you know how to start a fire with it and everything. It's just that it's so long, it's taking you so long to do it, your hand's hurting, there's no handle on it. So it was not the appropriate knife. Why is this kind of knife the appropriate knife? Come here and I'll tell you why. So I'll tell you why this is the appropriate knife for bushcrafting on such a trip like that. There's no snow on the ground, but I need to get birch bark in a hurry, and I know there's birch bark there because it's a nice thin blade. The blade profile is thin, it's a full flat. This thing here has a high saber grind, so it's really fat and chunky up here to like here, this distance over a centimeter thick, and that's got to penetrate and push apart whatever you're trying to do. This, however, has a narrow blade profile, so it's really good for that. Plus the fact, because it's got a proper handle on it. And if I have to push into it like this is flat here, so this is not going to affect me. But the point is, regardless of the end here, it's got a full-size grip on that, and I can put a lot of force into it. And this basically this presents the least amount of friction necessary. Okay, so here's another knife that could have been good for something like that too, getting birch bark. And this is the Ego Blackbird I've got here. This is a D2 blade. This was N690. It doesn't really matter, but you see the blade, let's just have a look at that. You see they're about the same really, about the same thickness, a little bit thickness here, but on here they're about the same. And this also would go in there, nice rounded on here. This is not going to injure your hands having to cut something really quick like that. Okay, so why would you want to cut it in a hurry? Just re-scabbard that because that's important. So the reason why you want to cut it in a hurry maybe is because you've got a bunch of people, they're all cold, you can light a fire, and you don't want to be embarrassing yourself, and you don't want to become a liability. So you would need to get this, relatively flat. The other thing you can see here, if I didn't chop up this, thing here, I could use sheets of this. There's lots of these birch logs around here. You can see that they're all around the place. If the cameraman just pans around, you can see they're everywhere. So actually there's a lot of these trees around, and you can see straight away, I could, if I had enough of these, this would form a tile, a waterproof tile, and I could build a shelter with it, right? Okay, so you need to, you don't want to butcher this stuff when you're taking it off if you can do that. So, the wood might be rotten underneath of here and not so good, and damp, not so good to burn, but this is really useful, and this stuff will burn, as Junior Bush Camping Tools has said. It will burn even if it's basically wet and certainly damp. Why would one come out with something like this and you think, well, it's a great little small knife, it's EDC, don't have to, carry anything big with me, more than good enough for a picnic. And certainly, yeah, I used it for a picnic, cutting up some meat, you know, even because it's like a small wedge, busting up a few little logs to put in the wood stove to cook the meal with. But that's about the limitations of it. Okay, that's about the limitations of it. Sure, you can peel fruit with it, all those things. These things have got limited use, and the limited use is because they've got small handles, right? There's nothing wrong with the blade as such if it had a bigger handle. If it had a bigger handle, yeah, I could probably put more force in it coming through the birch bark, but it doesn't, and that's what lets these things down. So knowing that I'd be able to gather birch bark, you know, I would take a more appropriate knife. Now, the other week, or several weeks ago, I was out solo hiking, and solo hiking is a whole different kettle of fish. Let me tell you about that, because as the name suggests, you really have to be independent. If you're only going down to the local park, that's nothing, you know, nothing's going to happen to you. But if you're going to hike several kilometers away from the closest access road, and by that I mean access not by some four-wheel drive or a six-wheel drive truck, I mean an ordinary car could come in there, or an ambulance if it had to. So if you're going to hike away from those things, you have to be prepared. Now in that video I made, I took out this knife, and I chose carefully about why I would take this particular one. This is happens to be my Extrema Ratio Fulcrum. Why did I take that? It's because the handle is basically completely rubber around here, this foreprint. And if I was to be crazy enough to lose a glove, like let's face it, in The Master and the Man from Tolstoy, the master lost his glove, didn't he, in the storm, and basically ended up with frostbite. And of course, I won't tell you the rest if you've never read it, but it was a serious situation. So I know that if I get my hands wet, I can still put them on here, and they're not at sub-zero temperatures going to freeze to the tang. Okay, but and I chose to take that also as opposed to the Cephalins, because for a start there were no logs around. They were all buried under the snow, so I wouldn't know where the heck the logs were to cut any birch bark off. But if I lost my gloves, my hands would definitely freeze to this exposed tang here. That's not going to be wise. So that was not the knife for that. And if I have to bust up bigger logs, this is too thin for that. Other than that, if there was no snow, this is a great knife. Does it happen that you could, you know, you could take something like this out and end up a liability? In fact, even if you had a knife, it's possible, you know, because you are swayed by the social media and marketing towards such small knives that they're kind of like EDC. Okay, so EDC, what does that mean? Everyday carry. And EDC does not necessarily mean that it's everyday carry in the bush. You know, it can be EDC in an urban environment, of course, because this I can crack open cardboard boxes, I can cut through any amount of plastic ties, I can even lever those big, you know, those big steel copper-plated staples out of things with impunity because of the thickness of this blade, and slash away at cardboard boxes all day. That's no problem, and that's certainly good EDC. I can walk around with it in my pocket, especially, as one viewer pointed out too, I removed the tech lock and just put this Kydex sheath in my pocket. That's no problems. But EDC in the bush, it is not. So with a knife with a bigger handle, it's easier to do because I've got a good grip on the knife, I've got more control. So many people ask me on the channel quite often actually, you know, what's the best knife to get, you know, what knife should I buy this, should I buy that, what do I recommend? They might suggest several different knives. And you know, 9 times out of 10, actually 100% out of 10, I hope, I will reply with, well, where are you going to go with that knife? What environment do you live in? What country are you contacting me from? Where do you like going hiking or camping? You know, is it where there's a lot of birch and you've got all this flammable bark like this, or is it in the deserts of Namibia, you know, and there's no birch trees growing. So where do you want to hike? That's the first thing. So once you figure out where you're generally going hiking, and you're thinking about the things that you may need to do, maybe you're going hiking and this is not allowed, you know, even on fallen trees, you're not allowed to take this kind of stuff. You may not even be allowed to light a fire. You might only be able to use a multi-fuel stove or some other kind of fuel stove if you want to boil a cup of water. I've been on many trails where you're just not permitted to hack down trees, and in some certain trails around the world, you're not even allowed to pick up, you know, wood from the ground, even though it's dead wood, and use it to light a fire, because, you know, the authorities say that, you know, that wood is covering things that, you know, you can disrupt the environment underneath of there. So there's absolutely no fires. Or you may not be able to light a fire on the ground. It has to be in some kind of wood stove. So you can use a wood stove, but it can't be on the ground. So there's all these things to consider before rushing off to buy a knife. Because if you rush off and you go and buy a machete, and then you realize, because you like big knives, there's nothing wrong with that, but you buy this machete and you realize, well, you're never going to go to the jungle, you're never going to be cutting things that a machete is designed for. These are all hardwoods here, all these things here. And sure, you might be able to swipe through one with a machete, you're probably going to injure your hand, but machetes are generally used for cutting through brush or bush, which is softer woods. They originate in like the tropics and things like that. So if you're in the tropics, sure, a machete could be a good option. I've also, you know, done extensive camping and hiking in tropical areas, and of course we did have a machete, and we had a smaller knife, some smaller knives as well too, because, you know, just small knives on their own, you're never going to be able to hack into coconuts, green coconuts. You could do it for sure with rocks and things like that, but you'll be there forever and a day. So it's really about thinking what kind of environment you're going to go to, and therefore that will dictate the kind of tools. It's a bit like what I joke about surfing, you know, use different boards for different waves. All right, bush camping tools here. Thanks for watching.